Psychology Arousal Screencast. Arousal is a state of awareness and anticipation that prepares the body for action. It involves physiological activation and psychological activity. Arousal is when all your emotions are put into one and causes an action. The action unknown to your normal traits and could be an unexpected result. Our concentration and attention span. Our concentration and attention span is affected by your level of arousal. If you have a low arousal level, you'll have a broad attention span, which is a bad thing because you start picking up irrelevant information because you're looking too wide. An example of this could be in a football match. You see your teammates warming up on the sideline, and during the game, whilst you're playing on the pitch, you pass the ball to them. This is because they aren't paying attention to the game and were looking too wide, that they took in irrelevant information off the pitch. When you have optimal arousal levels, you have optimal attention span, which means you have the right amount of vision, allowing you to be able to pick up the right cues and enhance your performance. An example of this could be any track event, but when at optimal level, the long jump is a good example because the athlete would time their run and stride length so they hit the board perfectly. This would cause them to be able to jump higher and further. To do this, they would also have to listen to the crowd so they get pumped up, but not listen to them too much that what they focus on, because other events will be going on as well. So would have to ignore them and the cheers that aren't for them. By doing this, they have reached optimum level of arousal and attention span. Having a high arousal level means you have a narrow attention span, so you focus only on one thing. A good example of this could be in a basketball match. If you get elbowed, for the rest of the game, all you focus on is getting them back. This means your vision is very narrow and you can't see cues to make the right decision. So you might not see that your teammate is looking at you and you drop the ball when they pass it to you, giving the opposition team a chance to regain possession of the ball. Hole's drive theory. Hole's drive theory shows that there is a positive correlation between performance and arousal, as shown in the diagram. It shows that as your arousal increases, so does your level of performance. The graph also suggests that your performance can only increase with arousal, however this can't be true. An example of where this theory does work is for simple but powerful movements and skills. For example, a weightlifter, they need to be aroused as they can psych themselves up to lift heavier than the person before them. This improves their performance as they have lifted the heaviest weight. An example of where this doesn't work is for sports where they have to stay focused to perform well. For example, a darts player. If they have a high level of arousal, their hand would be shaking, which would mean they wouldn't be accurate. Also, they wouldn't be able to stay focused as they would have too much energy. This proves that this theory doesn't work for all athletes and sports. The inverted U theory. The inverted U theory shows that there is an optimum level of arousal where your performance is at its optimum level as well. It also shows that if you get over or under aroused, your performance can have a negative effect. This is why it's better than Hole's drive theory, because it gives more than one suggestion for why you performed at optimum level or performed badly. An example of being at optimum level is a basketball player, McGrady, who in a game scored 13 points in the last 35 seconds to win the game by 1 point. The first curve First curve would be athletes like an archer. This is because they need their optimum level of arousal to be low so they can keep a steady hand to have a good aim. They also need to stay focused on the target, which won't happen if they are over-aroused. They need optimum level of arousal to hit the target. However, different types of archers and shooting need different levels of arousal at different times. The second curve would be a rugby player because they need a variety of arousal levels throughout the game. This means they have to make decisions at different points in the game. For a tackle, they need high levels of arousal, but they don't want to be over-aroused because they don't want to do a high tackle and risk the other team getting a penalty. They would need a lower level of arousal when doing set pieces because they don't want to forget what they have to do or drop the ball. This is why they're in the middle curve because they need middle levels of arousal for all different decisions during the game. The last curve would be weightlifters because they need high levels of arousal to lift the weight. They have the highest level of arousal, however they can get overurged, which would mean they might lift the weight at the wrong time or with a slightly wrong technique. This would mean they wouldn't be able to lift the weight, causing it to be a poor performance. Skills. A complex skill needs a low level of arousal because they need to concentrate more to perform better. A high arousal level would make them perform badly because they are complex skills. It means they are easier to mess up as they have more things to think about. A high arousal level would mean they can't think about all the different components to execute the skill right. An example of a complex skill would be a tennis serve. A simple skill needs a higher level of arousal because they need energy to execute the skill with power. As there isn't much to think about for a complex skill, you can have a higher arousal level because it will help you to complete the skill at a good standard. A good example of this would be a shot put because they need lots of power and don't need to think about lots of different things to do it. It's one movement so can be learnt easily, meaning a high arousal level will increase the performance. Athletes. The graph shows how the different athletes will reach different arousal levels. Beginner athletes have a low arousal level because they have a low performance compared to elite athletes. Also, they won't have a high arousal level because they don't have massive crowds watching them and it's not in a pressured environment. As they are still in the learning stages of their sporting journey, they need to be able to retain information. If they were to have a high level of arousal, they would fall to pieces because they wouldn't have the experience to be able to deal with it and bring their performance back to optimum level. Intermediate athletes have a medium level of arousal because they are still learning skills, but they also have big crowds watching and experiencing and expecting good things from them. They are at a high level of performance, so they need to have a higher level of arousal so they can perform a bit better than the beginners, but also have experience that isn't far away from the elite. Elite athletes experience high levels of arousal because they perform at high levels. They have been through the learning process so they can experience these high levels of arousal to make them perform at their optimum level. They also need to experience these high levels of arousal because they have more people watching and more pressure to deal with. If they were to become over-aroused, they would be able to handle it because they have lots of experience to go on and would go back to this to regain optimum level of performance. The catastrophe theory. The graph shows the relationship between how you perform and your arousal levels. The solid black line shows that as arousal increases, so does your performance. However, it reaches an optimum level, but if you get any more aroused, your performance decreases. Point A is is the optimum level of arousal where it benefits your performance. Point B is where you have got over-aroused and as a result your performance has been negatively impacted. After this, it can either go to point C or point D. Point C is where the athlete is unable to recover and their performance continues to be poor. This is normally what happens to non-elite athletes who don't have much experience. This is because they get overwhelmed and don't know how to deal with it. Point D is when the athlete is able to recover and bring their performance back to a high level. This is normally done by elite athletes as they have the experience of lots of other times where they have been successful. They can use this to bring their performance and arousal levels back to optimum level. An example of this in a positive scenario could be a professional footballer. In a game, the striker misses a one-on-one with the goalkeeper at the end of the first half, but comes back in the second half, making passes and having accurate shots and scoring 2 goals, which means they have used their previous experience to get back to optimum level. An example of this in a negative scenario could be a netball goal shooter has the final shot of the third quarter and misses. However, they are only playing their local team, so they don't have much previous experience. This then causes them in the final quarter to keep dropping the ball, missing shots and giving penalties away. This means they still have a high arousal level, resulting in performance decreasing because they were overwhelmed and still learning.